NATO's secret armies, Operation Gladio, and terrorism in Western Europe. Welcome to the Richie Brown Show. Today we're on Chapter 3. The silence of NATO, CIA, and MI6. At the time of the Gladio discoveries in 1990, NATO, the world's largest military alliance, was made up of 16 nations. Belgium, Denmark, Germany, France, Greece, the United Kingdom, Iceland, Italy, Canada, Luxembourg, Norway, Portugal, Spain, the Netherlands, Turkey, and the United States, with the latter commanding a dominant position within the alliance. NATO reacted with confusion to the revelations of Italian Prime Minister Andreotti and feared for its image when the secret state behind armies were linked to massacres, torture, coups d'etats, and other terrorist operations in several countries of Western Europe. After almost a month of silence on Monday, November 5th, 1990, NATO categorically denied Andreotti's allegation concerning NATO's involvement in Operation Gladio and the secret armies. Senior NATO spokesman Jean Marcotte said at SHAPE headquarters in Mons, Belgium, that NATO has never contemplated guerrilla war or clandestine operations. It has always concerned itself with military affairs and the defence of Allied frontiers. Tuesday, November 6th, a NATO spokesman explained that NATO's denial of the previous day had been false. The spokesman left journalists only with a short communique, which said that NATO never commented on matters of military secrecy and that Marcotte should not have said anything at all. The international press protested against the ill-advised public relations policy of the military alliance, when it related with bitterness as shock followed shock across the continent. A NATO spokesman issued a denial. Nothing was known of Gladio or Stay Behind. Then a 7-word communique announced that the denial was incorrect and nothing more. As trust in NATO diminished, the headlines ran, quote, "Undercover NATO group may have had terrorist links," unquote. Secret NATO network branded subversive commission finds that Gladio, the alliance's underground arm in Italy, became a focal point for fascist elements bent on combating the communists by instigating terrorist attacks to justify repressive laws. A bomb used at Bologna came from NATO unit, unquote. A NATO diplomat who insisted on remaining anonymous reasoned in front of the press, quote, "Since this is a secret organisation, I wouldn't expect too many questions to be answered. Even though the Cold War is over, if there were any links to terrorist organisations, that sort of information would be buried very deep indeed. If not, what is wrong with taking precautions to organise resistance if you think the Soviets might attack?" So you see how they managed to weave this thread of faking a Soviet attack on Europe to justify their terrorism. They're supporting a fascist. They're removing from power and parliament various socialists and communists democratically elected. According to the Spanish press, NATO Secretary General Manfred Warner, immediately after the public relations debacle of November 5th and 6th, held a Gladio information meeting behind closed doors on the level of NATO ambassadors on November 7th. The Supreme Headquarters Allied Powers Europe, SHAPE, directing organ of NATO's military apparatus, coordinated the actions of Gladio. According to the revelations of Gladio Secretary General Manfred Warner during a reunion with the NATO ambassadors of the 16 allied nations, the Spanish press related, quote, "Warner allegedly had asked for time in order to carry out an investigation with respect to the no knowledge at all statement which NATO had issued the previous day. These precisions were presented in front of the Atlantic Council meeting on the level of ambassadors, which according to some sources was held on November 7th. The highest ranking military officer of NATO in Europe, US General John Galvin, had confirmed that what the press was reporting was to a large degree correct, but had to remain secret. During this meeting behind closed doors, the NATO Secretary General related that the questioned military gentleman, precisely General John Galvin, Supreme Commander of the Allied forces in Europe, had indicated that SHAPE coordinated the Gladio operations. From then on, the official position of NATO was that they would not comment on official secrets. According to sources that wished to remain anonymous, NATO's Office of Secretary. Given the strength of the communist parties in several countries of Western Europe, NATO had engaged in secret non-orthodox warfare ever since its creation in the years following the Second World War. According to the findings of the Belgian parliamentary investigation into Gladio, secret non-orthodox warfare even preceded the foundation of the alliance. As of 1948, non-orthodox warfare was coordinated by the so-called clandestine committee of the Western Union. According to the press, all Gladio nations were members of the clandestine committee of the Western Union. Only officers with the highest NATO security clearances were allowed to enter CPC headquarters were under the guidance of CIA and MI6 experts. The chiefs of the Western European secret services met at regular intervals during the year in order to coordinate measures of non-orthodox warfare in Western Europe. When in 1966, French President Charles de Gaulle expelled NATO from France, the European headquarters of the military alliance, to the great anger of covert action scholar Philip Willen relates. When President de Gaulle decided to pull France out of NATO's combined command structure, denouncing the protocols as an infringement of national sovereignty, while original copies of the secret anti-communist NATO protocols remain classified, speculations concerning their intent have continued to increase after the discoveries of the secret anti-communist stay-behind armies. US journalist Arthur Rouse in his Gladio article claims that a secret clause in the initial NATO agreement in 1949 required that before a nation could join, it must have already established a national security authority to fight communism through clandestine citizen cadres. Italian expert on secret services and covert action, Giuseppe De Lutis, found that when becoming a NATO member in 1949, Italy signed not only the Atlantic Pact, but also secret protocols which provided for the creation of an unofficial organization charged with guaranteeing Italy's internal alignment with the Western Bloc by any means, even if the electorate were to show a different inclination. Our stay-behind was coordinated together with other analogous secret European structures by the CPC, Co-Coordination and Planning Committee as shape. The supreme headquarters of the Allied powers in Europe, Italian General Gerardo Serravalle, revealed. The predecessor of General Inzarelli, General Serravalle, commanded the Italian Gladio from 1971 to 1974, and related that in the 1970s, the members of the CPC were the officers responsible for the secret structures of Great Britain, France, Germany, Belgium, Luxembourg, the Netherlands, and Italy. These representatives of the secret structures made every year in one of the capitals. Each time high-ranking officers of the CIA were present during the meetings. At the stay-behind meetings, representatives of the CIA were always present, Serravalle remembered. They had no voting right and were from the CIA headquarters of the capital in which the meeting took place. Furthermore, members of the US Forces Europe Command were present, also without voting rights. The directive shape was the official reference, if not even the proper Allied stay-behind doctrine. Serravalle explains in his book on Gladio and stresses that the recordings of the CPC, which he had read but which remain classified, above all relate to the training of gladiators in Europe, how to activate them from the secret headquarters in case of complete occupation of the national territory, and other technical questions as to quote the most important one, unification of the different communication systems between the stay-behind bases. Next to the CPC, a second secret command post functioning as a stay-behind headquarters was erected within NATO in the early 1950s, called ACC. Like the CPC, ACC also was directly linked to the US-controlled SACEUR, that's SACEUR. According to the findings of the Belgian investigation into Gladio, the ACC was allegedly created in 1957, responsible for coordinating the stay-behind networks in Belgium, Denmark, France, Germany, Italy, Luxembourg, Holland, Norway, United Kingdom, and the United States. During peacetime, the duties of ACC, according to the Belgian Gladio report, included elaborating the directives for the network, developing its clandestine capability, and organizing bases in Britain and the United States. In wartime, it was to plan stay-behind operations in conjunction with SHAPE. Organizers were to activate clandestine bases and organize operations from there. Italian Gladio General Inzarelli claims that the relations in the ACC were completely different from those in the CPC. The atmosphere was clearly more relaxed and friendly compared to the one in the CPC. ACC, founded by a specific order from SACEUR to CPC, allegedly became a sub-branch of the CPC. Allegedly, the body served above all as a forum in which Gladio know-how was exchanged between the numerous secret services chiefs. The ACC was an essentially technical committee, a forum where information on the experiences made were exchanged, where one spoke of the means available or the means studied, where one exchanged information of the networks, etc. Italian Gladio commander Inzarelli recalls, it was of reciprocal interest. Everybody knew that if for an operation he lacked an expert in explosives, or in telecommunications, or in repression, he could without problems address another country because the agents had been trained in the same techniques and used the same materials. Most prominently, the so-called harpoon radio transmitters featured among the material used by all ACC members. They were developed and produced in the 1980s on the orders of NATO's Gladio Center ACC by the German firm AEG Telefunken for a total of 130 million German marks and replaced an older communication system which had become obsolete. The Harpoon system was able to send and receive encrypted radio messages over a distance of 6,000 kilometers and thus connected the different stay-behinds across the Atlantic. The only material element which all stay-behind members of the ACC shared is the famous Harpoon radio transmitter. Belgian Gladio agent Van Ussel, who himself operated Harpoon stations during his active time in the 1980s, revealed in the 1990s. As he understood it, this system was regularly used for the transmission of messages between the radio bases and the agents, above all during radio exercises, but was above all destined to play a central role for the transmission of intelligence in case of occupation. There was an ACC basis in the European states and one in the United Kingdom, from where the units in the occupied countries could be activated and commanded. ACC manuals allegedly instructed gladiators on common covert action procedures, encryption and frequency hopping communication techniques, as well as airdroppings and landings. The presidency of the ACC rotated every 2 years among the member nations, and in 1990 was held by Belgium. The ACC meeting of October 23 and 24 was presided by Major General Raymond von Kalster, Chief of the Belgian Military Secret Service, SGR. General Inzerelli recalled that in contrast to the CPC, there was no fixed and predetermined directorate in the ACC. The presidency in the committee was held for 2 years by a member rotating between all the member states in alphabetical order. Hence, the ACC did not feature the same predominance of the great powers. Inzerelli preferred the work in the ACC to the work in the more strongly US-dominated CPC and testified, "He must say, also after having personally had the experience of being the president of the ACC for 2 years, in its total it was really a non-discriminatory committee. Further research into Operation Gladio and the stay-behind network of NATO must beyond any doubt focus on the transcripts and recordings of the ACC and CPC. But still years after the discovery of the top-secret network, the official response, much like in 1990, is characterized by silence and denials. When the author, during his research in summer 2000, contacted NATO archives with the requests for more information on Gladio, and specifically on ACC and CPC, the military alliance replied, "We have checked our archives and cannot find any trace of the committees you have mentioned." When the author insisted, NATO's archive section replied, "I wish to confirm once more that the committees you refer to have never existed within NATO. Furthermore, the organization you refer to as Gladio has never been part of the NATO military structure." Thereafter, the author called NATO's Office of Security, but was not allowed to either speak to the director, nor know his name for that was classified. Mrs. Isabel Jacobs at the Office of Security informed the author that it was unlikely that he would get any answers concerning sensitive Gladio questions, and advised the author to hand in Gladio questions in writing by the embassy of his home country. Thus, the observation Swiss mission at NATO in Brussels forwarded the Gladio questions of the author to NATO, with Swiss ambassador Anton Thalmann regretting that neither to me nor to my staff the existence of secret NATO committees, as mentioned in your letter, is known. What is the connection of NATO to the Clandestine Planning Committee, i.e. the CPC, and to the Allied Clandestine Committee, the ACC? What is the role of the CPC in the ACC? What is the connection of the CPC and ACC with NATO's Office of Security? The author had inquired in writing and, on May 2nd, 2001, received a reply from Lee McClenny, head of NATO Press and Media Service. McClenny, in his letter, claimed that neither the Allied Clandestine Committee nor the Clandestine Planning Committee appear in any literature, classified or unclassified, about NATO that I have seen.
He added that further, I have been unable to find anyone working here who has any knowledge of these two committees. I do not know whether such a committee or committees may have once existed at NATO, but neither exists at present. The author insisted and asked, why has NATO senior spokesman Jean Marcotte on Monday, November 5th, 1990, categorically denied any connections between NATO and Gladio, whereupon, on November 7th, another NATO spokesman had to declare Marcotte's statement of 2 days before had been false, to which Lee McClenny replied, I am not aware of any link between NATO and Operation Gladio. Further, I can find no record that anyone named Jean Marcotte was ever a spokesman for NATO. And there the matter rested. The CIA, the most powerful secret service of the world, was not more cooperative than the world's largest military alliance when it came to the sensitive issue of Gladio and stay-behind questions. Founded in 1947, 2 years before the establishment of NATO, the main task of the CIA during the Cold War was to combat communism globally in covert action operations and promote the influence of the United States. By covert action operations, US President Nixon once defined the tactic T means those activities which, although designed to further official US programs and policies abroad, are so planned and executed that the hand of the US government is not apparent to unauthorized persons. Historians and political analysts have ever since described in detail how the CIA, together with US special forces in silent and undeclared wars in Latin America, had influenced political and military developments in numerous countries, including most prominently the overthrow of Guatemala's President Jacobo Arbenz in 1954, the failed attempt to overthrow Cuba's Fidel Castro in the 1961 Bay of Pigs invasion, the assassination of Ernesto Che Guevara in Bolivia in 1967, and the overthrow of Chile's President Salvador Allende and the installation of dictator Augusto Pinochet in 1973. And the sponsoring of the Contras in Nicaragua after the revolution of the Sandinistas in 1979. Beyond, the Americans, the CIA also carried out numerous covert action operations in Asia and Africa, among which the most prominent were the overthrow of the Mossadegh government in Iran in 1953, the support for the white South African police, which in 1962 led to the imprisonment of Nelson Mandela, the support for Osama bin Laden's Al-Qaeda in Afghanistan after the Soviet invasion of 1979, and the support to communist Khmer Rouge leader Pol Pot from bases inside Cambodia following the defeat of the US in Vietnam in 1975. From a systematic scientific perspective, the Covert Action Department of the CIA, according to the definition of the FBI, is therefore a terrorist organization, because terrorism, according to the FBI, is the unlawful use of force or violence against persons or property to intimidate or coerce a government, the civilian population, or any segment thereof, in furtherance of political or social objectives. When in the mid-1970s, the Parliament in the United States realized that the CIA, as well as the Pentagon, had increased their power almost beyond control and had also abused it on numerous occasions, US Senator Frank Church wisely observed that the growth of intelligence abuses reflects a more general failure of our basic institutions. Senator Church at the time presided over one of 3 critical investigations of the US Parliament into the US Secret Services, which in the second half of the 1970s presented their final reports that until today remain among the most authoritative documents of the US on US secret warfare. The overall impact of the investigation of the US Congress was, however, marginal, and the Secret Services, supported by the White House, continued to abuse their power, as the Iran-Contra scandal in 1986 highlighted. This led historian Catherine Olmsted at the University of California to the central question: after starting the investigations, why did most members of the press and Congress back away from challenging the secret government? While the debate concerning the existence or non-existence of a secret government in the United States continued, the Gladio evidence shows that the CIA and the Pentagon have repeatedly operated outside democratic control during the Cold War, and also after the end of the Cold War remained unaccountable for their actions. Admiral Stansfield Turner, director of the CIA from 1977 to 1981, strictly refused to answer questions about Gladio in a television interview in Italy in December 1990. When the journalist insisted with respect for the victims of the numerous massacres in Italy, the former CIA director angrily ripped off his microphone and shouted, "I said no questions about Gladio!" whereupon the interview was over. Retired middle-ranking CIA officers were more outspoken about the secrets of the Cold War and illegal operations of the CIA. Among them, Thomas Polgar, who had retired in 1981 after a 30-long career in the CIA, and in 1991 had testified against the nomination of Robert Gates as directors of the CIA because the latter had covered up the Iran-Contra scandal. When questioned about the secret Gladio armies in Europe, Polgar explained with an implicit reference to CPC and ACC that the stay-behind programs were coordinated by a sort of unconventional warfare planning group linked to NATO. In the secret headquarters, the chiefs of the national secret armies would meet every couple of months in different capitals. Polgar insisted that each national service did it with varying degrees of intensity, while admitting that in Italy in the 1970s, some of the people went a little bit beyond the charter that NATO had put down. Journalist Arthur Rouse, formerly on the staff of the Washington Post thereafter, in an essay on Gladio in Italy, drew, quote, "the lessons of Gladio," unquote. As long as the US public remain ignorant of this dark chapter in US foreign relations, the agencies responsible for it will face little pressure to correct their ways. The end of the Cold War, Rouse observed, changed little in Washington. The US still awaits a real national debate on the means and ends and costs of our national security policies. Specializing in the research on CIA, covert action, and the secret Cold War, the academics of the independent non-governmental National Security Archive Research Institute at George Washington University University in Washington filed a Freedom of Information Act request with the CIA on April 15th, 1991. According to the Freedom of Information law, all branches of the government must be accountable to public questions concerning the legality of their actions. Malcolm Byrne, Deputy Director of Research at the National Security Archive, asked the CIA for all agency records related to the United States government's original decisions, probably taken during the 1951-1955 period, to sponsor, support or collaborate with any covert armies, networks or other units established to resist a possible invasion of Western Europe by communist-dominated countries, or to conduct guerrilla activities in Western European countries should they become dominated by communist, leftist or Soviet-sponsored parties or regimes. Furthermore, Byrne highlighted, with reference to the above, please include in your search any records relating to the activities known as Operation Gladio, particularly in France, Germany or Italy. Byrne correctly pointed out that any records obtained as a result of the request would contribute significantly to the public understanding of United States foreign policy in the post-World War II era, as well as the role of intelligence information analysis and operations in United States policymaking at the time. Yet the CIA refused to cooperate, and on June 18th, 1991 replied the CIA could neither confirm nor deny the existence or non-existence of records responsive to your request. When Byrne appealed this refusal of the CIA to provide any Gladio information, the appeal was turned down. The CIA based its refusal to cooperate on two catch-all exemptions to the FOIA law, which protect documents, that is, either properly classified pursuant to an executive order or in the interest of national defense or foreign policy. Exemption B1. All the director's statutory obligations to protect from disclosure intelligence sources and methods, as well as the organization, functions, names, official titles, salaries, or the number of personnel employed by the agency, in accord with the National Security Act of 1947 and the CIA Act of 1949, respectively. Now, we basically know why that they're refusing to unleash any information regarding Operation Gladio, because Operation Gladio continued after the Soviet Union collapsed, and Operation Gladio B, where this time the target was Muslims and Islamism. Instead of national extremists and anti-communists, like fervid anti-communists, they basically gave weapons and arms to Muslim extremists so they could fracture and break apart multiple nations, like Yugoslavia. A bunch of the Muslim extremists up into Chechnya during the Chechen wars, into Yugoslavia to break apart Yugoslavia. They basically recreated the KLA, the Kosovo Liberation Army, which was formerly Marxist-Leninist, and then after Soviet collapse became essentially an Islamic extremist organization. When European officials attempted to challenge the secret government, they were hardly more successful. In March 1995, the Italian Senate Commission, headed by Senator Giovanni Pellegrino, after having investigated Gladio and the massacres in Italy, placed a FOIA request with the CIA. The Italian senators asked the CIA for all records relating to the Red Brigades and the Moro affair in order to find out whether the CIA, according to the Gladio domestic control task, had indeed infiltrated the Red Brigades before they killed former Italian Prime Minister and leader of the DCI, Aldo Moro, in 1978. Refusing to cooperate, the CIA raised FOIA exemptions B1 and B3, and in May 1995 declined all data and responded that it can neither confirm nor deny the existence of CIA documentation concerning your inquiry. The Italian press stressed how embarrassing this was and headlined, "The CIA has rejected the request to collaborate with the Parliamentary Commission on the mysteries of the kidnapping. Moro, a state secret for the USA." The second Gladio inquiry to the CIA by European government officials came from Austria in January 1996 after top secret CIA Gladio arms caches had been discovered in the mountain meadows and forests of the neutral Alpine state. US government officials declined that the United States should cover the costs arising from the digging up and recovery of the CIA networks. The Austrian investigation of the scandal under Michael Seeker of the Interior Ministry on November 28, 1997, presented its final report on the CIA arms cache and declared that there can be no absolute certainty about the arms caches and their intended use. Hence, in order to reach a rigorous clarification, access to the relevant documents, especially in the United States, would be desirable. Member of the Commission, Oliver Rathkolb of Vienna University, thus placed a FOIA request in order to gain access to the relevant CIA documents. Yet in 1997, the CIA Chairman Agency Release Panel declined. Also, Rathkolb's information request under FOIA exemptions B1 and B3, leaving the Austrians to lament that the CIA was unaccountable for its actions. As FOIA requests are the only method available to get hold of any CIA Gladio documents, the author on December 14, 2000, placed a FOIA request with the CIA, whereupon 2 weeks after, the CIA replied to the author's request pertaining to Operation Gladio in an evasive manner. by stating that the CIA can neither confirm nor deny the existence of non-existence of records responsive to your request. By raising FOIA exemptions B1 and B3, the CIA Information and Privacy Coordinator Catherine First Dyer, with her letter, declined all information on Gladio. The author appealed this decision of the CIA and argued that the documents that were withheld must be disclosed under the FOIA, because the secrecy exemptions B1 and B3 can only reasonably refer to the CIA operations which are still secret today. With data of his research, the author proved that this was no longer the case and concluded, if you, Mrs. Dyer, raise FOIA secrecy exemptions B1 and B3 in this context, you unwisely deprive the CIA from its voice and the possibility to take a stand in a Gladio disclosure discourse, which will take place regardless whether the CIA decides to participate or not. In February 2001, the CIA replied that your appeal has been accepted, and arrangements will be made for its consideration by the appropriate members of the agency release panel. You will be advised by the determinations made. At the same time, the CIA stressed that the agency release panel deals with appeals on a first received, first out basis, and that at the present time our workload consists of approximately 315 appeals. The author's Gladio request was thus shelved and put off. At the time of writing, almost 4 years later, the CIA agency release panel had still not answered the author's request for information. The British Secret Service, MI6, was the third organisation after NATO and the CIA to have been central to the stay-behind operation. MI6 did not take a stand on the Gladio affair in 1990 because, with a legendary obsession for secrecy, its very existence was only officially confirmed in 1994 with the passing of the Intelligence Services Act that specified that MI6 collected foreign intelligence and engaged in covert active operations abroad. While the British executives in MI6 refused all comment, Conservative Party member Rupert Allison, editor of the Intelligence Quarterly magazine under the pen name Nigel West and author of several books on Britain's secret security services, at the height of the Gladio scandal in November 1990, confirmed to Associated Press in a telephone interview that we were heavily involved and still are in these networks. West explained that the British certainly helped finance and run with the Americans several networks, and through the MI6 together with the CIA were directly involved. The people who inspired it were the British and American intelligence agencies. West said after 1949 the stay-behind armies were coordinated by the command and control structure for Special Forces of NATO, within which also Britain's Special Air Service, SAS, Special Forces played a strategic role. Britain's role in setting up stay-behinds throughout Europe was absolutely fundamental. The British BBC reported in its Newsnight edition with some delay on April 4th, 1991. Newsnight reader John Simpson criticised that MI6 and the British Defence Ministry were withholding all information on the subject, while on the back of revelations that Gladio existed, it has emerged that other European countries had their own stay-behind armies: Belgium, France, Holland, Spain, Greece, Turkey. Even in neutral Sweden and Switzerland, there has been public debate. It's interesting that Sweden has come into NATO quite recently, and in some cases inquiries have been set up. Yet in Britain there is nothing, save the customary comment of the Ministry of Defence that they don't discuss matters of national security. Simpson related that ever since the fall of the Berlin Wall, the British with fascination and horror had learned of the conspiracies and terror operations of the Stasi, the Securitate, and other secret services in Eastern Europe. Could our side have ever done anything comparable? Surely not, he noted with ironical information, and then turned the spotlight on the Western security services. Yet now information has started to emerge of the alleged misdeeds of NATO's most secret services. In Italy, a parliamentary commission is investigating the activities of a secret army set up by the state to resist a possible Soviet invasion. The inquiry has led to the disclosure of similar secret forces across Europe, but the Italian group known as Gladio is under suspicion of being involved in a series of terrorist bombings. I'm sure when this all comes out about Operation Gladio B, where they've been arming a lot of the terrorists, the Muslim terrorists, it will come out that those were all connected to MI5. The Libyan terrorist and the Manchester bombings in 2011, for example, he was ratlined to Libya to overthrow Gaddafi, and then he came back and committed those terror attacks. So I wouldn't doubt they probably continued this strategy of tension just under the guise of financing and arming Islamists. The BBC was unable to get government officials to take a stand on the Gladio affair, and the official confirmation that MI6 had been involved came only years later and through a rather unusual channel, a museum. The London-based Imperial War Museum in July 1995 opened a new permanent exhibition called Secret Wars. What you're about to see in the exhibition has for years been part of the country's most closely guarded secrets. The visitors were greeted at the entrance. It has been made available to the public for the first time here, and most important of all, it's the truth. The fact is more incredible and exciting than fiction. An inconspicuous comment in one of the windows dedicated to MI6 confirmed that among MI6's preparation for a Third World War were the creation of stay-behind parties, ready to operate behind enemy lines in the event of a Soviet advance in Western Europe. In the same window, a big box full of explosives carried the commentary, "Explosives packed, developed by MI6 to be hidden in potentially hostile territory." It could remain buried for years without any deterioration of its contents, and next to a booklet on sabotage techniques for stay-behind parties, a text read, "In the British zone of occupation in Austria, junior Royal Marine officers were detached from normal duties to prepare supply, caches in the mountains, and liaise with locally recruited agents." Former MI6 officers rightly took the exhibition as a sign that they could now speak out about the top-secret Gladio operation. A few months after the exhibition had opened, former Royal Marine officers Giles and Preston, the only MI6 agents to be named in the Gladio exhibition next to a photo in Austrian Alps 1953 to 1954, confirmed to author Michael Smith that throughout the late 1940s and early 1950s, the British and Americans had set up stay-behind units in Western Europe in preparation for an expected Soviet invasion. Giles and Preston at the time were set to Fort Monckton, near Portsmouth in England, where the MI6 trained the gladiators together with the SAS. They were given instruction and codes, the use of a pistol in covert operations. "We were made to do exercises going out in the dead of night and pretending to blow up trains in the railway stations without the station master or the porters seeing you." Preston recalled his own training. "We crept about and pretended to lay charges on the right part of the railway engine with a view to blowing it up." The Bologna massacre is one of the trains they did actually blow up. Killed about 90 people in Italy. Giles remembered that they also took part in sabotage operations on British trains that were in public service. As for instance, during the exercise at the Eastleigh marshalling yards, we laid bricks inside railway engines to simulate plastic explosives. I remember rows and rows of steam engines all under thick snow, standing there in clouds of vapour, Giles recalled. There were troops out with dogs. The guards came past and I was actually hiding among the cylinder blocks of these engines as they went past. We were also opening up the lubricating tops of the axle boxes and pouring in sand. What happens is that after about 50 miles, the sand in the axle box starts to turn them red hot and they all overheat. The agents were hardly bothered that the locomotives were in public use. That wasn't my problem. We were playing for real, Giles explained. I had to do a 10-day course in Greenwich, learning about following people in the street and shaking off people following me. Preston recalled. The practicalities of being in the intelligence world. Then they were flown to Austria in order to recruit and train agents and oversaw the underground bunkers filled with weapons, clothing, and supplies of the Austrian Gladio, which had been set up by MI6 and the CIA. When the author visited MI6 headquarters on the banks of the Thames in London in 1999, he was not too surprised to be told that MI6 does not comment on military secrets. Alright, thank you for tuning into the channel, guys. Remember to like and subscribe. The next episode will be on Great Britain, which is a pretty interesting one, so tune in for that. Thanks.